So far you've seen how we can take changes from one repository and merge them into another through the use of a central repository. But what happens if you make a change on one repository and it conflicts with a change on another one? Now this would only happen if one or multiple lines had changed in one repository and the identical line or lines have changed in another repository. Well, let's go ahead and set up this scenario and talk about how to resolve the conflicts that result from these modifications. So let's begin by going over to our production site. The scenario here is that we're making a change on our production site to fix a bug of some kind, and we need to pull that into our development site. But along the way, we make the same change on our development site because we found the bug there as well. And so now we have different changes in two different places that we need to merge. So I'm going to jump to the directory where our production site is. Now again, just make sure you're in the production site and not in the original development site if you're following along. And let's open up the input.module file. We're just going to make a small innocuous change here in the comments as a demonstration. So I'm going to add, this is a change we want to keep. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to jump back to the command line. And let's do a git status just to make sure that the only thing that's changed is this particular file. If we look here, we have this one modified file. Okay, let's go ahead and push this up to production by first making a local commit and then pushing it up. So the command is git commit. I'm passing A to skip the staging area. And then the message is changed file description for input.module on production. This message will just help us track things as we look at the log later. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, now let's go ahead and push this with git push. Okay, we got confirmation that we pushed. Now let's jump over to our development site and make a change to the same line. So I'm going to go back to the file system and I'm going to open up the development site and I'm going to open up input.module. And now let's go ahead and make a change to the same line here. Okay, I just put this change will cause a conflict. Let's go ahead and save this and jump back to the command line. Let's do a git status just to make sure that this is the only file that's changed. And sure enough, it is. So now let's say we want to pull in any changes from the remote site into our local site. So let's go ahead and do a git pull. Now when we do this, we get an error message. It says your local changes to the following files would be overwritten by merge. Please commit your changes or stash them before you merge, aborting. So when we did the pull, we did the fetch part of the pull, and so we have all of our remote data. But when it came to the merge, where we would normally merge our changes from the remote in with our local branch, it skipped that because we would lose some changes. Now this is good to know that if we do a git pull, that it won't override our changes, even if they haven't been staged yet. So like it suggests, let's go ahead and do a commit and then pull in the changes. I'm just doing git commit, passing the A parameter again to skip staging, and the message is changed file description for input.module on development, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, now let's do git pull. So here's what happened. It began the auto merging process, and then it found a conflict, which it alerts us to by the capital conflict here. It says merge conflict in, and then our input.module file. It says automatic merge failed, fix conflicts, and then commit the result. What happened was it did pull in all of our changes from the remote site, but instead of the changes being pulled in alongside one another, in this case there's a change to the same place. And so the merge tool added both lines in the same file. And so if we actually tried to use the file, it would probably be broken. The code wouldn't work. Let's take a look at what the file looks like. I'm going to jump back to the input.module file on our development site. And here at the top, we see these right arrows and then head. This is the name of the branch where this line belongs to. And again, head is our local active branch, which is master. And we see our change here. This change will cause a conflict. And then the two versions of this line are split with a row of equal signs. And then here's the alternate line that belongs to the commit that has this hash here. Now if this were a code change somewhere down here, then this metadata would probably break the functionality of the page. Since it's in a comment right now, it's not going to. But this means that if you do a git pull and you didn't really pay attention to the alert messages and your site is broken, then it's possible that there's a conflict here. I'm going to jump back to the command line, and let's do a git status. We see that the input.module file has a status of both modified, which means that there's a conflict. So let's go ahead and resolve the conflict by going back to the file and simply choosing which line we want to keep and removing everything else. So let's go ahead and keep the "this is a change we want to keep" line. So I'm going to remove the 3 lines above it, and I'm going to remove the line below it, and I'm going to save it. So now our file should be functional. If we jump back to the command line and we do a git status, we'll see that the file still has a status of both modified. In order to resolve the conflict, we simply need to add this file to the staging area. So I'm going to copy the location of the file, and I'm going to do a git add, and then paste in the location and hit enter. And now if we do git status, we'll see that our file is in the staging area. It's green. At this point, there's no record of there ever having been a conflict, but we do need to go ahead and commit this change. So let's go ahead and commit it. I'm going to do git commit, and the message I'm putting is resolved conflict in input.module. I'm going to hit enter. And now if we do a git log, we'll see that we have our resolved conflict commit, but we also have the commit that we made locally in our development site and the commit that we made on our production site. So we have a full record of the changes that were made. So if we decide at some point that the modification that we just made was the wrong one to choose, we can roll back to any of these, or at least see the differences between our current copy and the versions that existed in these revisions. I'm going to go ahead and hit Q to exit out of Vim. And now let's go ahead and take these changes and sync up our production site to them too. Our first step is to push these changes to the remote site. So I'm going to use git push. And once those have been pushed, then we can go ahead and jump back to production. And just to be safe, let's go ahead and do a git fetch first in order to pull in the information about a remote repository. And now let's do a git status. And it says that we're behind origin master by 2 commits. So this means that those 2 revisions that we made in the development site haven't been pulled in yet. Let's go ahead and pull them in with git pull. Okay, we got confirmation. And now, if we take a look at the log, we'll see that we have our resolved conflict commit, and then our 2 commits for the different lines on development and production. Now in the real world, when you're dealing with code conflicts, you might run into a couple of differences here. One is that the actual code that's changed might span multiple lines and might be kind of difficult to pick through the changes. So in cases like that, it's useful to use a graphical diff tool like the one we used in SmartGit when we were talking about diff in order to compare the differences between the 2 versions. That way you can see the exact characters that have changed from one version to the next. The second thing that will be different is that sometimes there will be multiple modifications. And so if you're using the manual method and not using a graphical tool, I'm going to jump back to the code and I'm going to undo a couple of times until we get our conflict metadata back. You'll see that at the beginning of a conflict is all of these left arrows. So if you wanted to make sure that you were hitting all of the different points of conflict in the file, you can simply copy this and do a search for it throughout this page in order to find if there's any other conflicts.